basically the idea is that we want to discuss a couple of different things. So if you're already using flight levels within your organization, there may be some things that the current circumstance and possibly also future circumstances such as this would create. And so how do you adapt? And the other is that maybe you're not using flight levels in your organization, and we want to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that flight levels could help with in your organizational context, especially if you're adapting to the current climate and so on. Cool. So I wonder if maybe we can start off with just a sort of a lighter question and just get a little bit of like, how did you get into agile and flight levels and so on? And maybe Justyna, you can start, give us a sort of the 30-second, what do you do?
Okay, so basically my adventure with flight levels started from the ACE conference when I met Klaus. And it was, I think, like 2 years ago. And since then, we had like a chance to cooperate on the current translation on Rethinking Agile into Polish, which will be available soon. And right now, together with Paul, we are planning to design the online flight levels trainings also in Poland and not only. And Paul.
Very cool. Awesome. Cool. And Paul, maybe the same question for you. How did you get into this space?
Well, my agile journey goes back to 2004 when I finally was running my own dev shop and got to do things my way, and we adopted Scrum by the book from the get-go. But I think what really drew me into the idea of flight levels, I had heard Klaus talk about it before, but I was in a consulting situation with a very large organization, and they were dealing with significant shared services and dependency issues across multiple teams around the world. And there was really nothing in my experience or in the bodies of knowledge that I had drawn on before that really helped me to optimize that situation, even though all of the, the theoretical stuff was there, and flight levels is the set of tools that brought it all together for me.
Awesome. Cool. That sounds interesting for sure. Cool. And Klaus, I mean, I guess some people may have heard of you before, and they may know a little bit about where you come from and so on, but maybe you can tell us a little bit, the sort of short version of how did flight levels come about, and maybe just a sort of in a nutshell, what is flight levels?
In a nutshell, well, I was looking for a picture, more or less. So I was consulting with an organization, and I was somehow stuck at the team level. And it was quite interesting when they offered me to make their, I guess, 340 or 70 or something like this, teams agile. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a good job to do. But maybe I won't help you so much when I do this. And I tried to get the message across that local optimization may lead to global sub-optimization. And that's where I came up with the picture of flight levels. So you cannot address, like Paul said before, all these dependencies and stuff like this. It's quite hard if we just try to coordinate this on a team level. So we need to think in different levels in our organization, like the operational level. Like we need to think of how do we coordinate between teams and between products and services, and what about strategy? And that's basically flight levels. Flight level 1, operational. Flight level 2, coordination between teams and product services. And flight level 3, strategy. That's in a small nutshell, actually, flight levels.
Awesome. Cool. So we have a couple of videos, one specifically that you can have a look at on flightlevelsacademy.com. It's actually from a conference that is hosted by Paul and Justyna in Krakow. This is the ACE Conf. Unfortunately, this year it is not happening on the date it was planned. It will be online, and there will also be a version later on in the year once things are sort of somehow figured out and we know when we're allowed to leave our houses again. But yeah, have a look at the video if you want to go a little bit deeper into flight levels and what the background of it is. The video is about an hour long. It gives you some good context. We won't go into too much detail about that now. Cool. So I want to kick off with a couple of questions just to kind of frame this and see where we are. But before I jump into that, I want to just tell everybody on the call, if you're seeing this link, I know I'm reposting it multiple times, but there is a link for Slido. You can post questions both in real time on the chat, but also on Slido. If you post them on Slido, others can vote them up and so on. And that will allow us to have a little bit more interaction in this discussion. So as we're going, if something's not clear or you want to ask a question, please stick it on the Slido and we will do this. We will also have some time, probably sort of 30 minutes or so for Q&A at the end, where we will go through all of the questions in a bit more detail. But please feel free to post them as we go. That'll be quite interesting. Cool. So, shall we go to our first question?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, we all know that the current situation has obviously created some kinds of challenges, not least of all the fact that we are all video calling in is one of the challenges. But maybe we can have a little bit of a conversation on what are some of the sort of challenges that you see organizations facing given the current crisis. And maybe we can also talk a little bit about, how that relates to things that may come in the future, or what sort of challenges we may face in a similar or different crisis even in the future. So let's kind of explore what is this and what are the challenges that we see organizations facing in the current context.
Okay. Who starts?
I think your internet needs to start first.
Okay, so I'll hop in while Klaus's internet reasserts itself.
Oh, sorry, I was away.
Yes.
You paused. Paul is going for it.
Perfect.
Well, I think there are a couple of categories of issues that companies in general are dealing with right now. One obviously is on the personal level. All of the services that are delivered by people, and not by people individually, but by people collectively. And so suddenly everyone in an organization has to learn new ways of interacting with the people that they have to interact with in order to get things done. And so that's created a whole suite of challenges. But also there's the kinds of problems that companies can run into these days are so different and so much more dramatic than in the past. Suppliers that they were dependent on may suddenly cease to exist overnight as all of the workers are sent home. And that can require a great deal of collaboration, coordination to try to adjust to. And then the biggest problem I think that most companies face is that nobody really knows what the future, even in the relatively short term, is going to look like. And so how do you plan? If your company has a quarterly plan or an annual plan, what's it worth anymore if you have no idea what next month is going to look like?
Yeah, for sure.
That's exactly where I started, and then I paused. So that's good if I pick up right here. I also think that's really the thing. So when we think about agility and business agility, it's a lot about dealing with uncertainty. And for many organizations, it's like, well, what is uncertain? There is no uncertainty. Yes, it's here right now. So I guess it's, that I think for a lot of organizations, that's the biggest challenge, just to not know what's happening in the future.
And personally for me, because actually, business agility is like connecting lonely agile islands. And right now I have a feeling that we don't work with a few distributed teams, but everyone is just one person distributed team. So all the dependencies that we used to deal with, now they are like multiply, and a way to adjust to the new situation and think which can be removed, which can be managed, and how. It's, I think, a huge challenge for flight level 2.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So if we're thinking about some of the challenges that companies are facing, what would you say are some of the things that maybe are, I don't know how to put this, but basically if you're running in an organization that is using flight levels, what sort of effects would you possibly see, or how would you find that maybe you're adapting a little bit easier, or what benefits would you find?
Benefits to flight levels. Well, very much the same benefits, but I think that the more important question is if you were effectively using flight levels in your organization before all of your employees were sent home and your contractors started going offline and your stock started crashing and such. How do you need to adapt so that they still work as well for you as possible in this environment? And I think there's a lot of answers to that question, but the most obvious one to me is you probably need to reappraise the cadences that you had established during more stable times. What meetings that used to take half an hour and take place once a month maybe should now take 5 minutes and be done twice a day. The question I ask when establishing cadences is, how long would it be okay for everyone to not know that there was something going terribly wrong? And in a normal, smooth pace of development, especially in like IT organizations that are delivering products over 6 months or a year, it's fine if something is on fire for 2 weeks before you find out during a sprint review, for example. But these days, 2 weeks is a lot of time. And some of the problems that companies are facing are huge and devastating and need to be raised quickly. And so maybe we need to reappraise how long it's okay to not know what's going on.
Yeah, and this is also, or maybe not also, but especially true for Flight Level 3, for instance. So when I run these workshops on where we build these flight level systems and we build the Flight Level 3 board and we talk about cadences, and I always ask, okay, how often do you think we shall meet here in front of this Flight Level 3 board and talk about strategy and stuff? The answer I get most of the time is, well, let's do it 4 times a year, a quarterly meeting or something like this. And I'm always like, well, what about a weekly meeting? So we have 2 ideas in the room, we can talk about it. But the thing is, even if you would do it once a week these days, it's too long. So also for the strategy where we always think, okay, we only need to do it once a year or something like this. So yeah, I guess it's for all the flight levels, we really need to rethink the cadences these days.
Yeah, cool. So we're talking a bit about the speed of responding to the change. That's one aspect of it. Paul, you touched a little bit on the sort of the human side of the effect of this change. And I imagine that for different folks, this experience both of being remote and being disconnected from people has different effects. I mean, my wife and I joke, I'm an extrovert and I'm sort of, you know, where are the people I want to hang out? And she's like, this is fantastic because I don't really like people that much anyway. So she's quite happy in this kind of a context. And I think, you know, this is one thing. When you think about this, I mean, obviously those buckets are quite broad, but what are some of the ways that like you need to take the people into account in responding in this sort of a crisis situation?
Well, I think they're both positive and negative aspects. The challenges are, of course, all of the systems and styles of interaction that worked in person are not going to work as well remotely. And I think 2 of the biggest issues is interpersonal issues are going to be a lot more difficult to address. People are under a great deal of stress. Some people are dealing with it better than others. And while emotions are always a part of the way that we collaborate, they're very easily hidden when you're only meeting online. And so incorporating more activities with check-ins and human aspects to these online activities, I think can help to keep a team knitted and healthy. But there's also a positive aspect, and that is that it used to be that most of the interactions took place at Flight Level 1 because that's where you're working with the people who are in a room with you. And the power of Flight Level 2 systems is it brings people together who don't normally talk because maybe they're in another building or on another floor or even in another country. And now, thanks to the fact that we're all working from home, the people in your Flight Level 1 team are exactly as far away from you as the people in your Flight Level 2 systems. It's just as easy to have a Zoom call. It's just as easy to join a chat. And so it could be that properly managed, those relationships and interactions can become as efficient at Flight Level 2 as they naturally happen at Flight Level 1.
I like that. Yeah. I often find it amazing how often the human side is ignored when it comes to doing kind of some large organizational change or trying to make improvements. It's sort of, you know, the amount of understanding and the depth at which we go to sort of incorporate the human side is often missing for me. Yeah, cool. So moving on to a slightly different topic. I mean, obviously, in a lot of organizations, one of the things that comes up in at least in sort of a financial aspect of the crisis is the issue around, how do we deal with the fact that we maybe don't have as much revenue or as many customers or not selling as much products as we had before. And one of the common kind of go-to things that people do is, some kind of cost cutting, retrenchment, downsizing, these kind of factors. And I think that there's probably some other options that we could explore. And I'm curious, what other things do you see as possibilities, and how could, maybe thinking about the different levels in a flight level system, how could you approach this sort of a situation?
Well, I really think that there will be this cost-cutting kind of thing going on. Maybe not in each and every industry, but well, I see it coming. And I think that's actually a huge opportunity for flight levels. So one thing is to cut costs. The other thing is to be more productive, so to become better, actually. And I think especially flight levels has some very good answers regarding this, because it's a lot about global optimization and not so much about the local optimization. And especially when it comes to costs, I think local optimization is maybe, it's even not so effective, but it's very expensive also. So if I just think of an organization and I somehow want to improve the way how we work, and I try to make all my teams agile or something like this really costs a whole lot of money. But the flight level way of thinking is that in the first step, most of the time, we leave the teams working like they do. But we just try to make sure that the right team is working on the right stuff at the right time. This means you have to spend way less money to become better, and the lever you're pulling is much higher. So it's not so good for consultants because consultants are earning less money, but it's very good for organizations because they don't have to spend that much money, but see a much better effect sooner and faster, actually. It's just my thought on it.
Yeah.
We actually had a conversation about that before with Paul, because we didn't want to treat this question as just, cutting heads and laying off people. And we had actually similar conclusion that thanks to flight levels, you can create focus. You can create actually products that are value generating rather than create 20% more features that no one uses. And Paul had one snarky comment that he might probably don't like me if I say it, but I really like it and I think it's worth to mention, that actually a lot of companies might right now save money on the annual plannings that are taking a lot of time and happens in not the cheapest location all over the world. So maybe those money might be better spent because they will do planning more often, they will have stand-ups because they might finally see the value in it. Am I right, Paul?
Good point.
Allegedly. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, one of the ways that a lot of companies are responding in this situation is that moving things digital. And I think what we've seen is sort of a wave of companies that were maybe, some companies such as, companies that are used to doing things online, maybe don't struggle so much with the adaptation, but other companies were completely not ready for this. What are your thoughts around how companies can better adapt to the current climates, tooling and those sort of things?
Well, certainly when you're looking at like Justyna brought up, flight level 3, I have participated in annual planning meetings with large corporations, global corporations, and they usually involve flying in 15, 20, 30, 40 executives to one location where they just meet for 2 solid weeks. And you cannot do that. You cannot do that online. If your way of doing planning is to get all of the biggest egos into your company in a room to just hash it out based on politics and bravado, that doesn't translate well to Zoom. It's exhausting. And so transitioning from doing your planning for 2 weeks every year to doing your planning for 5 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday would be a huge relief to a much more efficient way of using those people's time, because it's, you know this, we've been moving our training online, and even just 3 hours of training is absolutely exhausting in a room of 12 people. So finding ways in which to break work down, to break conversations down and just talk about smaller time boxes and focus on what's really important for shorter periods of time would be essential to improving the effectiveness of those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just running a flight level sport design workshop, and I guess even some of the participants are online here, what I see, which is nice. And we broke it up into, so it's usually a 2-day workshop, and we broke it up into 4 half days. But still, after half a day, it's really like, at least for me, it feels like, wow, that was really exhausting. But there are 2 co-trainers with me. No, not with me. We were doing it 3 people. So Andreas Rein and with Lukas Schmidt. So 3 people, and it's draining energy totally. That's strange.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. I mean, I don't know if this is a topic. Maybe you guys have some opinions on them, but like a lot of organizations are being pushed into a situation where we're trying out things for the first time. And I'm quite curious to see what things are different in sort of the post-corona world. You know, I mean, the idea that, I mean, I was just saying to a friend the other day that the fact that, you know, we were singing to each other over a Zoom call. Granted, we'd had a drink or 2, but we sang a song for reasons that maybe don't make a lot of sense outside of explaining the whole story. But that's not something that I would normally do. I usually don't Skype a lot of friends and have a video conference, and you know, I talk to my family and that's about it. But this has now become a normal way, and it's actually not that foreign to do this. You know, for sure, I would rather see people in person. But I'm interested, what do you think are some of the things that maybe companies are adopting or adapting to in this current climate that are maybe going to stick around or affect the way we do business and work in the future?
Well, certainly it's going to be a lot harder to get those travel budgets back next year. Any company that survives 2020 without paying for a single business class flight is not going to be keen to start shoveling out that kind of money for corporate travel.
Yeah. Perhaps from an environmental perspective, this is a win. Yeah.
From the human perspective. From the human perspective, I think like even though that right now we lack of human contact, like, you know, direct, I think like after this corona apocalypse, we will be like working even more closely, because I see that a lot of people right now, they are building stronger connections because they call to each other from their households, you know, they started like seeing the people in their house environment. And I see, you know, a lot of connections that are actually building like a real life connections. So I think that will pay off in the long term, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, there's obviously aspects of things that will come back and things that we will miss. But, yeah. Cool. So I see the link is now working. We're starting to get a couple of questions coming in. Please feel free to keep posting them. We'll jump over to some of those questions in a few minutes. I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between flight level 2 and 3, and maybe we can start with level 2 and say, what kind of adaptations or adjustments, sort of going a bit deeper, what kind of adaptations or adjustments would you see taking place at level 2 in the current climate?
Well, like I said before, flight level 2 coordination is going to actually become cheaper and easier for a lot of people, because it is now exactly as easy as flight level 1 coordination. But it's a really challenging thing to discuss, because flight level 2 is probably the most customized of the flight levels. I imagine you'd see very similar patterns among flight level 1 and flight level 3 systems. A Scrum team in this organization looks like a Scrum team in this organization, and corporate portfolio planning can look similar in multiple organizations. But every single flight level 2 system is designed to solve very, very specific challenges. I mean, there are some clusters of challenges like shared cross-team dependencies and shared services. But quite a lot of the issues that flight level 2 solves can be very, very specific to the organization. So they'd all have to have their own approaches. I don't know. What do you think, Klaus?
Yeah, totally agree. So, I mean, flight level 1, as you said, if it's a Scrum team, then yeah, we know how they work. Of course, depending on the industry, the flight level 1 systems, they can vary, but you don't see that much, or you see way more variety in the flight level 2 system. Just some examples. When you are modeling a flight level 2 system for a bank, for instance, you will see, I don't know how many wait times, because everybody's waiting for everyone. So we are waiting for approval, waiting for another thing, waiting for something, waiting for another thing, and waiting for something. If you do a flight level 2 system for, let's say, a web company, everything is totally different. This flight level 2 system you cannot compare because there's basically no waiting times included. But you don't see this on the team level. On the team level, you just see waiting, external waiting or something like this. But on the flight level 2, you really see where in your value stream you're waiting for what all the time. Yeah. And Cliff, you were asking about the difference also between flight level 2 and flight level 3. Is this correct?
Sure. Yeah.
What I see quite often, that there is this common misconception, and I guess in one of my early writings, I somehow created this misconception or this wrong idea. So what I observe quite often, so people think, okay, flight level 2 is coordination within the product or within the project or within the service. And if I have multiple products and I need to coordinate between these products, that's flight level 3. But that's actually not flight level 3. That's still flight level 2. Flight level 3 is it's really about strategy. Flight level 3 is about, I don't know, OKRs, KPIs. What do we want to achieve? How do we get there? And then we basically break it down to the coordination and to the operational level. So there's a huge difference between flight level 2 and flight level 3, because we might also talk about strategy, and it's a good idea to talk about strategy in flight level 2, of course, but it's not the main purpose of flight level 2. The main purpose is coordination across teams and products and services, if this makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine for a lot of companies, as we talked about cadences and so on, but I would imagine that many of the things that were even on the boards at level 3, for example, perhaps may no longer make sense. I mean, to connect to the example from earlier, if you were planning a big quarterly planning retreat or a yearly planning retreat, and you were going to fly everyone in, you know, the whole planning and several of the constraints have now changed. And so we have to adapt in different ways. And maybe people are buying no longer certain products. But I think very often what we hear people focusing on is some of the challenges that you face with this and all of the problems. But I think the other thing that we tend to miss is that it creates a lot of opportunities as well. I'm curious, what sort of opportunities do you see as a result of, you know, these new ways of working and new things that we're encountering as a result?
Actually, I see one of the very big opportunity, because in my limited imagination, normally flight level 3 representatives, delegates, they didn't collaborate so much with flight level 2 because they had their annual planning, they set their vision, and they set up the strategy for the whole year. And now somehow with the flight level 3, they have to figure out how to cooperate and collaborate constantly with the flight level 2 coordination to make sure that the strategy is constantly updated and executed. So I see it like a huge challenge to learn how to collaborate between those two levels.
And how to do
the
it more
flight
often
level
as
3
well.
questions ceases to be, are we on track? And it becomes, when will we have capacity? And what should we do next? Which is a very different way of thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So, there are a couple of questions here. I'm going to just quickly screen share so that everybody can see the questions as well. If I can find my button. Where is it going? There we go. Share. So everybody should be able to see the questions now as well. how about we start from the top? We say, for those of us who have done the flight level system architecture workshop, can you still see my screen?
I can see it.
I can see.
Cool. How can we deepen the knowledge and experience other than doing board design class? Any book available, etc.? What are the questions?
Yeah, Paul has a book there.
My copy.
Rethinking Agile. But actually, most of the people know Rethinking Agile, and that's the reason why they come to the flight level system architecture workshop. Or so. Yes, there are plans of writing a new book, and I thought it would be an awesome opportunity to do it right now because there is time. But well, no. But yeah, I'm thinking of really of writing another book where I try to combine all the latest knowledge of flight level system architecture and flight level sport design. That's one thing, but yeah, will take a year or so until it's out. So you need to attend the classes to get the latest information, to get the latest update currently. But there's something like the flight levels coach actually. And we're currently, Cliff, me and Sigi Kaltenecker and also Katrin Dietze, we're somehow trying to make sense out of this. There's already roughly 104 or something like this, flight level coaches out there, which is not too bad actually. So who already attended the flight level coaching training program. And yeah, we tried to reshape this, kind of. Some words from your side, Cliff.
Yeah, a couple of things that I can add there. So, I mean, at the moment, we're experimenting with some things around the community space as well.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk too broadly about that at the moment because it's not exactly open to the general public, unfortunately. We're sort of doing a bit of a closed beta, if you will, and once we feel confident that we figured out sort of the things, we will go a bit further. But basically, the idea behind the Flight Levels Academy is to try to provide a space to answer exactly that question of, I've done a workshop, I've done a class, I've done some experimentation, I've read a bit of a book, what should I do next? And so what we have at the moment, and we'll be releasing a bunch more stuff over the coming weeks and months, is an array of different workshops. And then also folks like Paul and Justyna, who are flight levels guides who can help people in the local markets, they can help you in the local language, they can help you in the local time zone. And if you look on the Flight Levels Academy website, there are several folks for that. And of course, as Klaus mentioned, the book, it's also lit. It's actually not on the website at the moment, but you can find it on Amazon. It's called Rethinking Agile. Paul was holding up his copy. Mine is somewhere over there at the moment, but I'll paste a link and you can find a way to purchase that. Yeah, otherwise experiment with some of the other workshops, have a conversation with us on Twitter, or as Klaus said, jump into the Flight Levels Coach workshop. That's a wonderful program for really taking your knowledge even deeper. Unfortunately, the name is anonymous, but I'm hoping that Anonymous got a good answer to their question. Maybe you can type in chat and just confirm that or deny it if that's also the case. Yeah, so thank you for your question. I'm going to screen share again and we can take the next question if I can click the button. Cool. So, I'm struggling to read. Sorry, my brain is not on as much as it usually is. Do you recommend a tool to track flight level 2 and multiple dependencies? This is our next question.
Who's good in tools? Paul, Justyna.
I really hate to say this, but yeah, I hate to say this, but there's really only two tools, digital tools. We're talking about digital tools here, because obviously the best tools that I've ever seen or used for flight level 2 systems are physical, but they are, if you're dealing with a small number of items, a small number of issues that you're tracking, simply doing a little bit of manual labor to use just a basic Kanban tool, whatever it is, whether it's Trello or what have you, will work. If you're dealing with something more complex, the only tool I know that can conceivably be configured to do this, if you have a sufficiently skilled administrator, is Jira.
Jira. Like this? Really?
I think 50% of the people on the call are loving you and 50% are crying into their porridge right now.
Nobody has created a really good tool that I know about for dealing with connecting flight level 1 and flight level 2 systems.
I mean, there are some tools out there, but it's always not so easy to as I guess the same is true in Jira, to set it up actually. So there's many tools who know relationships and stuff like this, but still there's not just one relationship. You have 5 relationships, like parent, child, and siblings and whatever. And you're like, okay, and now I guess it's not so easy. But I personally like Campanize as well. And I haven't used it for quite some time, so that's why I tried to ask the question to you. I use Campanize on a daily basis, but other tools. But what I know, Swift was quite good, but I haven't used it for a long time. But yeah.
But for managing dependencies between multiple flight level 1 systems, I don't think any of those tools will do it.
So I have a theory on this, in that what I often see happening is companies will start out doing something like this, introducing flight level system at level 2, and immediately the first question becomes, what tool should we use? And my response to this is often, if you know for certain that something is going to need to be automated and that you want it done in a certain way, then building something very complex and that sort of thing around it makes sense. But spending 2 weeks to automate a task that takes 5 minutes to do once, I don't think that this makes a lot of sense. And so what I usually advocate for people doing is, in a pre-corona world, I would say use a physical whiteboard. I would also say if you have to do something digital because you have distributed teams, use something simple like a Miro board or a Google drawing or even an Excel sheet. The point of what you're doing is to facilitate a conversation about the interactions between the work more than it is to try to make a pretty graph and some fancy metrics. In my experience, those things tend to abstract away from the actually important conversations of like, is this actually the most important thing? And the other part of it is that very often what happens is that people are trying to manage, if you've got 500,000 work items, I exaggerate a little bit, but if you've got, say, 55 things that you're trying to do within a team, probably the first conversation is not how do we manage those 55 things better, it's which of those is actually important. And so a little bit of this, like, let's figure out what are we focusing on. And once you've got that, visualizing that becomes quite a lot easier. Usually you don't even need something massively complicated in order to do that. But yeah, start with something simple, something that's easy to change, because otherwise you end up down a path. You have to teach people a new tool and it gets super complicated. But that's me jumping in and just sharing a thought.
But I think it's also often like we want that the tool is doing something for us that tools cannot do. So I just overread that it was in particular about dependencies. So what is the tool doing when it is managing dependencies? I don't know. So I guess human beings need to talk, need to manage these dependencies. Of course, we can come up with something like a dependency map, a dependency matrix, a dependency, I don't know what, but still that's just yet another visualization, but we need to act on it. And none of the tools can somehow replace the human interaction in the end. And that's what it's about. So I guess there's no miracle tool which just solves all the problems for us.
Yeah. I hope that was a somewhat useful answer. Please let us know in the chat and we can maybe do some follow-up on it, but I'm going to say that we move on. Cool. Next up, we have a question again from Anonymous. It says, okay, cool. That last one was from Sandra. I'm glad that you got an answer to your question there. Cool. From the original vision of flight levels in action, how, or if at all, does the flight levels approach, is the approach being adjusted to the new reality of COVID-19? Is that, so if I understand it correctly, basically, given how you used to think about it, how do you think about it now, or what's changed?
That question seems very similar to the one that, with which we opened this webinar, which was talking about how you do flight levels in the current reality. And I've got nothing to add other than the suggestions to improve the communication and increase the rate of cadences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If the flight level approach is being adjusted. So maybe I could read the question also like, did we adjust flight levels? And I would say no, because I mean, for me, it's not a method or something like this. It's like a thinking model, and we still need to think actually in these 3 levels and feedback loop interactions. So I guess there's nothing changed. It's actually made for situations like this in the end.
Yeah, I was going to say that that's exactly the conversation we had when we were preparing for this session, is saying like, you know, this is the kind of stuff that flight levels is actually made for. Like, I mean, maybe the rate of change is not exactly the same in a normal organization, or the level of uncertainty, but that's what we want to do. You know, as we learn and uncover new things, we want to be able to adapt and respond to it. And that's, I mean, we're doing that to a far higher degree than we normally do, but it's, you know, these are exactly the kinds of challenges that we're trying to solve. So, yeah, I mean, we're always learning though. And so not to sound like we're saying, oh, hey, you know, we haven't learned anything from the crisis, for sure. Like, you know, maybe we need to figure out some better answers to some of the things around digital tools and what are solutions for this. I mean, you know, we're doing a webinar before we would have probably been sitting face to face in a conference room or something like this. And so adapting to the remoteness and the virtualness of the world are certainly some things. But as far as the conceptual thinking, yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm sharing and unsharing my screen just so that you can see the people speaking a bit better, because I know how the audio or the video gets cropped out. But let's mark this question as done. Hopefully that gives you a good answer. Cool. Where does the politics go? How do people hash things out differently than going on retreats?
Hopefully away. Well, this is my thinking. When I'm participating in annual planning sessions, usually it's a lot of very highly paid people, and they know their organization's capacity. They know that we deliver 12 to 15 projects a year, every year. And so, but they've got 40 things that they want, and they negotiate that down to like 25 because they're going to do more this year than they did previously because they're going to be more agile. And all of that is done through political wrangling. And it's not necessarily in the best interest of the organization, because you have people like the CEO who thinks, I really want this project to get done, but the CFO is thinking, I want my project to get done, even though I know it is less beneficial to the organization. It would reflect better on me if my project was selected and implemented. And if you've got a big pool of work that you're trying to prioritize, you can negotiate, especially with the tail of it. But when you're meeting frequently to look at limited capacity as it becomes available, and the only question you have to answer is what one thing of all of the ideas, the ones that we've had on the backlog forever and the ones that just came up 5 minutes ago, which one thing are we going to do? You need some kind of criteria like OKRs. And those and effective criteria for matching a product to a product fit or an idea fit to the immediate situation and the strategy of the company can replace politics and be much more efficient at decision making.
And actually, when I was thinking about the benefits of the current crisis, I had the thought that maybe right now all the C-level people will finally try to look in one direction, because they know that individuals' agendas currently might just lead company to, you know, to the bankruptcy, because they have to have like at least one successful strategy that they can execute. So maybe those whisper conversation will actually go away, because no one will have so much time for that, because they have to focus on how to survive on the market.
Yeah, it's not only about
amazing how
on the same rope, it's also pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think there's nothing quite like a crisis to create focus within an organization, some sort of existential crisis, especially. Yeah.
Oh.
Cool. So,
my favorite prioritization method now or not now? Is there something in the chat? I guess, Cliff, you have something like this done within Spotify, right?
Yeah, I talked about it a couple of times. I think the idea was basically what you want to try to do is instead of focusing, I think very often people kind of they focus on what should the WIP limit be, or how do we limit the number of projects to a certain number. And what I like is to rather think about what is the number one thing, what's the number two, and what's the number three. And to be clear, if you use a heuristic like number three should never block number one, this is sort of the notion that if I'm working on number three and I needed to help out on number one, that's the one I should drop things for. Yeah. But if somebody comes along with a 17th priority and asks me to switch my focus, I would say not now. And so quite simply, everybody ends up with a very clear list, and I think it becomes a lot easier. But without that, I've seen so many prioritized lists where it's 17 things in an order, but we're working on all 17 really with no real difference in priority. And that to me is like, well, what was the point in putting them in an order or giving them any priority? So yeah, now and not now is a sort of a nice paraphrasing of both that and what Paul said. Yeah. Cool. Let's mark this one. Oh, I've nearly marked the next question down.
Yeah.
It says, are you in contact with tool vendors to include a real good integration of flight levels into the tools?
Cliff, are you in contact with tool vendors?
I mean, I've had conversations with tool vendors. I would say that people are interested in doing it. Is it something that I think is super important right now? I don't know. It's a hard one to answer because of what I said before. I kind of feel like putting the tool at the front of the conversation is kind of missing the point. The goal is about the interaction. And if you focus so much on trying to say, well, this thing is dependent to that thing and this thing over there, rather than the people talking to each other to figure it out, I also acknowledge that that's not a great answer because it makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. And it also doesn't really answer your question of like, how do we solve this in a digital world? But I think at the end of the day, most of the challenges that I see around dependencies are actually, it's not so much that the dependency exists, it's the amount of time we have to wait for the corresponding team to respond to that dependency. So for example, if I want something from Justyna, I send her a Slack message, in probably an hour, I get a reply back and I can carry on doing whatever I was doing. If it's super critical, I'm going to jump on the phone, give her a call. She's going to tell me straight away and I know what's up and we can carry on moving. But if I have to log a ticket in Jira and wait 6 weeks and then she prioritizes it to the top of her backlog and eventually maybe, the world has moved on and what I was asking for is probably no longer relevant. And so what I want to try to focus us on is rather solving the dependencies that are really important rather than trying to map out and manage all the myriad things that we have. So long answer to a shortish question. I'm still open to the idea. If you have maybe some specific recommendations, feel free to drop me a mail or message. Maybe you have something that you like. I'd love to continue the conversation. But I would say right now, it hasn't been something that's up till now been super high on our radar.
I guess it's like what we said before, now and not now. So yeah, sooner or later, this might be interesting for us. But I guess just to give you some insights, what we are thinking of. So currently, it's really very important to us to get the Flight Levels coaching program running to include all these flight level coaches to the community. And in the next step, we want to open up the community. And we really want to work to get more people into the topic to start the conversations. So that's what's currently interesting for us, and all the other stuff is more like, okay, later.
Yeah, in the spirit of sort of practicing what we preach, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I hope that gives us a somewhat helpful answer to the question. Yeah.
Well, I could add
Cool.
something if you don't mind.
Yeah,
I
sure.
see this as hugely challenging because if you built a sufficiently, if you built an ideal tool for, especially for managing flight level 2 systems, in most cases, I think it would harm the system. Because tools right now are designed for managing tasks. And it's one thing to manage tasks that are dependencies, just to flag so that this team knows that this team has a dependency. But the kind of conversations that happen in a flight level 2 system are about information that's not in the tool yet. So the kind of conversations that happen is this team is planning their backlog for the next sprint, and they're considering starting this feature, which is going to hit on this complex piece of the code base that your team is a specialist in. Do you think you're going to have capacity in the next 3 weeks to offer us support? That's not the kind of thing you can snap into Jira and just make that conversation happen. The people have to come together and talk about what's going on in order to make it happen. So I'm afraid that if a tool did a sufficiently good job of modeling flight level 2 systems, the flight level 2 systems would start mirroring the tool instead of doing their job.
So, but that's also what Cliff and I, why we are afraid of making this move actually. Because it's not like, okay, there are so many tools out there and we just need to write a flight levels plugin and everything is done. It's not like, okay, jump on a call with a tool vendor once a week and everything is great. As you said, I guess there's way more behind it. And yeah, we don't want to somehow burn it. Like, yeah, that's just my thoughts on it.
I think this makes sense. Cool. So we have one more question and we're also almost out of time. So I think this will be the last one, given that it's also the last one. What, if any, are the organizational impacts of applying flight levels? Is any modification in the org chart / accountabilities suggested?
No. Would be an answer. So I think I'm a huge fan not to start with the org chart actually. So, and I think that's somehow the beauty of the flight levels approach. So when you're running this flight level system architecture workshop where you're building a flight level system architecture, what you're basically doing is you are somehow imagining your best organizational structure without changing the organizational structure. You're like, okay, what would be, so more or less the heart of everything is the flight level 2 system. So the question is, what would be if our flight level 2 systems would reflect our products? What would be the situation if, I don't know, the processes would be our flight level 2 system? I don't know. So you put different ideas or you come up with different ideas what your flight level 2 systems could be. You build the flight levels architecture around this. And then you see, oh, if we put processes as a flight level 2 system, we would have, I don't know how many conversations going on. And each team would need to have, I don't know, 8 stand-up meetings because we need to join so many other stand-up meetings just to manage our dependency and to coordinate. And if you choose something else, it would be better. But the point is, we don't do the reorganization. And the idea is that you start with your best flight level 2 system. The teams and the org structure remains like it is in the first step. But if you practice and if you see, oh wow, that's really working for us, yeah, then you can start to change your org structure. But what I see so often is that people think if we just change our org structure, all our problems are solved. No, you just have other problems. It's different problems, right? So you move from one silo to another silo. You move from functional silos to cross-functional silos. You move to product silos, to process silos, to I don't know what silos, customer segment silos, whatever. You always end up in some silos somewhere. And the point of the flight levels idea is that we accept that there are some silos, no matter how, there's no perfect org chart. And the point is, we just try to manage. We try to drill some interaction holes within the silos. That's what we are doing with Flight Level 2 systems in the end. Yeah. And some silos, of course, are better than others.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds like Andrea's got a good answer there. I like it. Cool. So I want to promote something a little bit before we start with our wrap up. So Paul and Justyna have very kindly offered to have a free introductory 30-minute consultation if you're interested. And that's open to anyone who is on the call. I will share the link now, but I want to maybe turn it over to the two of you if you'd like to sort of give us a little bit of a pitch or an explanation of what you're offering.
Okay, so maybe I will take it over. So between 5th and 26th May, if I'm correct, we chose 7 time slots that are available in Calendly, and they are different, adjusted for the different time zones. So if you would like to learn more about flight levels, or if you have questions how to implement flight levels in your organization, you can just sign up for the slot that suits you and add some external information, for example, what kind of conversation you're expecting, so we can maybe prepare even a little bit better. Paul, would you like to add something?
No, only to say this, and that is that I've done this before and I really enjoy it. It's incredibly beneficial to me because as a consultant, I'll be embedded in an organization for 6 months or a year and a half, which doesn't give me an insight into so many different environments. And so doing these kind of consultations gives me a chance to do many shallow dives into many different sorts of environments and situations. And so it helps me as a trainer and coach, and hopefully it will help some of you as well, just to bounce ideas off of another brain.
That's awesome.
Excellent. Yeah. So the link is shared in the chat. I will include it in the mail that goes out tomorrow and a wrap up and so on. Cool. So thank you very much for that. I recommend taking Paul up on the offer and jumping on a call with him. Cool. So before we go, I want to thank you all for joining us. I pasted some links in the chat. They will go out as well in the email along with all of the other things that I've mentioned. You can follow us on Twitter. You can join us for further discussions. We'll be having the next session of this in 2 weeks. For those of you who are not aware, we alternate, so it's every 2 weeks. And it's once in this time zone and once, so it's basically, this is on 4 p.m. Bangkok time, and then we're on 4 p.m. Brazil time. So we're alternating back and forth between 2 ends of the globe. The idea is that we catch sort of Europe and the US and basically everybody through the mix of that. Yeah. The last thing I want to ask before we go is if you have any feedback that you would like to offer us, you can either mail me directly, but I will also share a link now to the Poll EV, and we'd like to get just a short set of, I don't know, words, comments, thoughts, takeaways from you. If you'd like the last link I just pasted now, sorry, let me just type this better. Feedback here. Cool, we'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts, anything that you think we could improve or something that would help make this better for you. Otherwise, have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And from all of us, have a great time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cool. Cheers, everyone.